In fact, DK Joshi, Chief Economist at Crisil, joins us now. Mr. Joshi, it's amazing how the big consumption story seems to be in question now after the last year. In fact, the last year has been pretty bad because if you look at two parameters, one is the CPI inflation, which is really consumer price index. It's been at close to 9 to 10% for a year now, and that has also had a direct bearing on consumption. As an economist, take us through what the correlation has been and how bad consumption is looking this year.
Well, I think what you should also remember is that the GDP growth has also been coming down. So incomes of the people are not rising that fast, and that reduces their purchasing power. And on top of that, when you have inflation, I think that particularly in some essential items like food, etc., then that bites you even more. So I think it's natural for private consumption to come down, and the private consumption growth in 2012-13, as per the CSO data, is at a 10-year low. So there is a crunch on inflation on private consumption, and I think it's showing up across sectors.
Will freebies help the situation? Because most of these freebies are also being timed, Mr. Joshi, just ahead of a possible, rate cut going forward. We'll talk about whether there's going to be a rate cut and how much. But is this timing very significant according to you?
Well, I think freebies help to a certain extent. I mean, beyond a point, see, I think the companies also realize that the consumer is stretched. So they are trying to ease the burden by giving some freebies or reducing the price. But I think beyond a point, there has to be a material recovery in the economy. There has to be a material rise in income. Only then you will see a sustainable bounce in private consumption. Otherwise, I think these things won't help much. I mean, they'll give some boost because the companies must be. They would have a lot of inventories. I mean, so you have to offload your inventories also. So I think this can give a temporary relief, but beyond a point, I think the income in the economy has to rise. I mean, without that, you cannot see a sustainable rise in consumption.
Mr. Joshi, usually you see in terms of consumption getting hit, your FMCG and retail is the last segment, which is where now we are beginning to see pressure. Do you foresee tougher times now for most of these FMCG companies?
Well, I think our call is that the private consumption will gradually bottom out. It is at the trough, and the bounce from the trough is not going to be sharp. It is going to be very gradual. So what we are predicting for 2013-14, next fiscal year, is that 2-3 things will come in, will support private consumption growth. One of them is, we assume, a normal monsoon. So normal monsoons over a bad year will give a kick to agriculture, rural income. So that should be positive particularly for rural consumption. If you look at the budget also, I think, has increased spending in rural areas. The rural spend has gone up quite significantly. So that should also help a little bit to boost rural consumption. Then I think you have interest rates coming down marginally, so that's mildly positive. And then I think these factors will increase capacity utilization in the economy a bit, and I think that means the overall demand, overall consumption is going up. We do not expect investments to pick up because that's going to take more time, and that's a more severe problem. But private consumption will definitely see a lift in 2013-14 according to us. That lift will be very gradual.
Sure. Mr. Joshi, since you mentioned rural consumption, do you see that now playing a larger role and contributing more at a time where clearly the urban consumption has taken a bigger hit?
Well, I think in the latest data that we saw from NSSO, I think the rural consumption, we found that rural consumption for the first time in 25 years had grown faster than the urban consumption. But now I think the issue is how much you can sustain. I mean, when the economy is not doing well, I think the spillover of that will be felt all across the board. But I think since rural incomes to some extent also depend on the monsoons, and if monsoons stay normal, yeah, I think the kick from the rural side should be slightly better, I mean, than from the urban side.
Mr. Joshi, very quickly, we are out of time, but you said we are at the trough and we are going to climb up from here. Is rate cut going to be a factor to get back consumption, or is it going to be elections? How do you see these two factors playing?
Well, I think rate cut is almost factored in. I think it will be mildly positive, but I think election spending, I can't predict right now because the budget is quite is focused in some sense that on fiscal consolidation. But I think as we near elections, we'll have to watch out for more welfare related spending. I think if that happens, that will definitely boost consumption. So I think that's a question mark as yet. But interest rate, I think some decline is given.
Okay. Thanks so much, Mr. Joshi, for that. That's really the big concern.